Hello, everyone. Welcome to our post-presidential debate coverage here on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University as part of WRHU's and Hofstra Votes Live's Road to the Polls. I'm Eli Finkelson.
And I'm Lauren Brill. President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden have wrapped up the first of 3 debates they will have before Election Day on November 3rd. This debate focused on each candidate's record, how they plan to address the COVID-19 pandemic, and election security.
Here to discuss everything with us is the director of the Kalikow Center for the Study of the American Presidency here at Hofstra University, Dr. Meena Bose. Dr. Bose, thank you so much today for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here tonight, right?
This evening.
All right, long night and first of many to come.
Absolutely.
So to start off, there was no audience and only one moderator for this debate. 2 things that have in the past made certain debates more interesting and diverse in questions and reactions. We could usually gauge a winner based on audience reaction, and we had a variety of questions from different moderators. How do you think this year's COVID precautions changed this year's debate?
Well, I think obviously the structure is very different from what we saw in 2016 when we hosted a debate. Actually, the first debate was at Hofstra. Very different, right? As we look back, September 26th, 4 years ago and 3 days. I think in some ways, actually, the system of not having an audience is not a bad thing. It forces the candidates, the president and the former vice president, to focus on the issues and the question. I think having one moderator, we do see some of the limitations there, particularly with trying to control or direct the flow of conversation. But I actually think that the lack of an audience, while from a hosting perspective, is disappointing. And I think seeing a presidential debate is certainly a unique experience. It was a pretty intense 90 minutes, and there's a lot to unpack there, but I don't think we lost anything with that. I don't think we lost anything from the substance. We certainly lost a lot from a viewing perspective, and in the post-debate analysis, the spin room that we had in 2016 at Hofstra was, pretty amazing for students, faculty, and I think for the journalists covering the debate.
And like you said, we have so much to unpack here, and we're really looking forward to unpacking all of it here with you tonight. But first, the question on everybody's mind is, of course, you said we saw 2 very intense performances tonight by President Trump and former Vice President Biden. We saw some steamrolling, we saw shouting, we saw trying to gain control over the ebb and flow of the conversation. But who do you think, if you thought there was one, was the clear winner of tonight's debate?
Well, I think it's pretty evident that that the president's attacks on former Vice President Biden, on his intelligence, on his speaking, on his family, I don't think those will be received well. The president's supporters may find them entertaining, referring to Senator Warren as Pocahontas, right? That was early in the debate when he was discussing healthcare. I don't think those will be well received. I don't think the president helped himself. I think that former Vice President Biden, by kind of staying focused, he got a couple of rejoinders in there. At one point, told the president to shut up. I mean, this was unfortunate, but the president clearly tried to dominate the debate. Tried to dominate the moderator, and I don't think that's sway. Not that there are many undecideds in this race, but it seems, I think, pretty clear that Biden's approach, I think, we're seeing already in the response, is much better received.
So looking to the first topic we heard about, the Supreme Court and President Trump's nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. Trump says it is his and the Senate's right to nominate and push through her nomination. Biden said, however, it should be up to the next president and Senate. So what is the precedent Trump and the Senate are setting if they do push through a nomination? And what could a conservative-leaning court do to the future of America?
Well, those are 2 big questions. The precedent really started with the Senate's refusal, and that was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, his refusal to meet with Judge Merrick Garland, who was President Obama's nominee in the spring of 2016 after the surprising death of Justice Scalia. The fact that the Senate wouldn't meet with the president's nominee and left the seat open until after the election, which of course President Trump then made the nomination after his inauguration. I think it's just a matter of time before the Democrats will extract something in return for that, with a nomination down the road. So that's really the first issue. The president certainly has the right to make a nomination. The Senate is conducting hearings in a very speedy process. But frankly, if the Senate had held hearings on President Obama's nominee in 2016, this would be much less contentious than it is today. As far as the issue of Roe v. Wade and Judge Barrett's rulings, I think those are bigger issues. We'll see what comes out in the hearings. Certainly, Judge Barrett has been on the Court of Appeals for 3 years. Was a law professor before that for 15 years at Notre Dame. Really has an academic record, more of an academic record than a record of judicial rulings. So I think we'll see what the Senate hearings reveal. But Judge Barrett has stated respect for precedent, though kind of leaving open the possibility of overturning precedents that are viewed as unconstitutional. I think we really have to. It's really not easy to predict.
And then looking at one of the other top discussions that we really saw tonight was the topic of COVID-19. And of course, everybody is wondering how both candidates feel about the country's response. And it was really looking for two different avenues for that. Of course, President Trump came at it from the perspective of saying it was China's fault. He referred several times to COVID-19 as the China virus. And of course, former Vice President Biden said that he would institute a national mask mandate. And both sides really have very opposing views. President Trump said that there would have been millions of deaths if Biden's plan were enacted. And former Vice President Biden said that 200,000 lives lost was a tragedy and could have been prevented, and critiqued President Trump on his response. So can we really unpack those two avenues? Trump did not really come in with any sort of plan. He just called it the China virus. So let's kind of unpack those two very different responses to the COVID-19 question.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the president is relying on a strategy of blame, of pitting, right, ethnic, racial, right, national hatred, and that's really inappropriate. It doesn't address the issue. It's incorrect. The idea that blaming China is that's the source of the problem really kind of misses how this virus spread. And while I think it's certainly true that in early 2020, most Americans, probably myself included, did not see this virus as never anticipated we'd see the shutdown that we had in the spring of 2020. Since March of 2020, we've learned a lot. For example, that masks and social distancing make a difference, that there are steps we could take to halt the spread of the virus, that it will take time for a vaccine, but that there is an end in sight. It may not be as soon as we like. The president raises some issues that are certainly concerns about people's mental health and the economic effects of this virus, the pandemic. These are serious concerns and they need to be addressed, but they can't dismissing this and blaming China, dismissing kind of efforts to address the situation and kind of the long haul that's needed. That really misses the whole kind of the scale of what we're facing with this pandemic.
So looking at another top topic of the night, climate change. Trump was asked multiple times about it, and he could not give a clear answer and repeated the main reason for the wildfires is poor forest management. Whereas on the other hand, Biden did list more clear points. So how will this have an effect on voters when climate change has been such an important topic?
Well, it's interesting because climate change actually wasn't on the original list. It was added. There were some complaints that it wasn't included. As I recall, climate change wasn't raised in any of the 2016 debates. So this is an issue that I think is particularly important to college students, to millennials, if you will, and kind of the post-millennials generation, Gen Z, if you will, I guess, right? These I think that bringing up the issue points to the importance of long-term thinking and looking beyond the next few months, the next year, but kind of how our current decisions, business decisions, choices we make about our natural resources have long-term implications, not just for people who are working now, but our families and our descendants. Um, I don't frankly think climate change is going to be is not the issue on people's minds right now as we look ahead to November 3rd. But the fact that Chris Wallace chose to include it, I think, reflects this kind of recognition that in the 21st century, this is an issue that we can't put off, right? We can't just keep waiting until it reaches a crisis stage. And many scientists would say we're at a crisis stage now.
Now, one of the highlights or lowlights, depending on how you're looking at it, one of the big things that we really saw happen was moderator Chris Wallace asked President Trump outright to condemn white supremacy, and of course, the president's response to that was instead calling it a party issue, and said it was a Democrats thing, it was a party issue, blue states. Do you think that answer or lack thereof will have a resounding effect on voters?
Well, I think it was surprising. The president doesn't like to be it's pretty clear doesn't like to be told to kind of this is what you should say. I'm not sure why he wouldn't do that, but I think that will actually not it certainly doesn't do anything to expand his reach. I suppose people who support the president would probably say that they know where he stands and they're comfortable with his policies, but certainly did not take the stance, I think, kind of the affirmative statement about achieving racial equality and racial justice that the question was really addressing.
So going off of that, at one point, moderator Chris Wallace asked Biden if he called the mayor of Portland, a Democrat, to ask him to stop the violence and send in the National Guard. Do you think this was a fair question to ask Biden, who currently holds no political office and has no authority to do such a thing?
Yeah, I think although the former vice president is not in office now, he's running for president, and there are kind of expectations of how the kind of question of how he would govern. I think the former vice president's response was, perfectly appropriate, and said that he thought that the mayor, that the state and local officials had the situations in their areas under control, and that there was that they would be able to manage it. Was that a perfect answer? It's a complicated issue, right? And as we saw, as the question about racism, right, was addressed, and then the questions about law and order, and as Vice President Biden put in, and justice, right, how you address these competing issues. They're not topics that are easily raised in kind of one-line responses, or frankly even 2-minute responses. But I think that the moderator's question was certainly a reasonable one.
And for those of you just tuning in, you're listening to WRHU's and Hofstra Votes Live Road to the Polls. Alongside Lauren Brill, I'm Eli Finkelson. We're speaking right now with Hofstra political science professor Dr. Meena Bose, recapping the first presidential debate between current President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. Let's move to a different segment of the debate that we saw, which was the segment on race and violence. Biden during this segment said that he wasn't completely against defunding the police, then said he'd want to give more funding to local police to give them proper training, send certified professionals with them like psychologists into the field when needed. Do you think that this answer will alienate, frankly, a voter population that's really keen on, quote unquote, defunding the police, a phrase that we've seen often?
I think the whole concept of defunding the police really needs to be examined more fully than you can in a campaign. And to answer your immediate question, no, I don't think this is going to be an issue. I think the Democrats, including right the centrist wing and the progressive wing or the far left wing, are pretty clearly focused on what their goal is in 2020. Now, there are after the election, right, depending on the results, but regardless, actually, frankly, the country really has the United States is facing kind of some critical questions here about how you address questions of violence, right? The horrific tragedy of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and sadly so many others, right? And what reforms are needed? And the term defunding the police is not well received by many groups. If you kind of start to discuss with people what they mean by that, the question of how you bring in, how you address conflicts with the police, how you address issues of law enforcement, who's brought in. It's a little more complex than the term defunding suggests. And so I guess I would just say that I think Biden's answer Biden tried to address the complexity of the issue, and I think that will be well received by his supporters.
So moving on to the integrity of the election, when asked about mail-in voting, Trump mentioned that it's going to cause fraud and be problematic. What is your take on the distress over mail-in voting going into this election?
Well, I mean, this is really probably one of the most critical issues, and it's unfortunate that it kind of only got 8 minutes at the end, right? Because they put in climate change, they separated a couple of other topics, and then they ran over at the beginning. There was a lot of back and forth. But in 2020, when many people really will need to vote mail in for reasons of health and safety, and there are questions about when the votes are going to be counted, what we're going to know on election night, how long we might have to wait till after. It is really essential that our elected officials and the political campaigns, candidates, demonstrate confidence in the system, and if there have concerns, to address those concerns before election day. I think it was pretty clear at the end of the debate that there are going to be allegations raised about missed ballots, about voter fraud, which has rarely been an issue, as the moderator brought up, as Chris Wallace brought up. Much larger issue has been ballots that aren't counted because of certain issues with how they're mailed, or if a process hasn't been followed. Those are the types of issues that need to be addressed, and I think it's very important to get the counting right, and to get the message, to communicate a clear message of how that's being done. And I think that's going to be that's probably the biggest challenge in the next 5 weeks.
Now, there were many guttural attacks that we really saw tonight, many of which were on the part of President Trump, which was expected because his campaign did say that he was going to be going on the offensive tonight after Joe Biden. One in particular that's really struck a chord that we've seen on social media a lot in the last half an hour or so was President Trump's attack on Beau Biden, Joe Biden's late son, a decorated war hero. And Joe Biden said, "My son is not a loser," right? His son passed away. Do you consider attacks like this what we would call, quote unquote, presidential? And do you believe that in today's time, what we consider to be presidential has changed?
Well, I guess first of all, the president said he wasn't referring to Beau Biden, right? He said, "I don't know Beau Biden." He was referring to Hunter Biden. There was an opportunity there to recognize Beau Biden's service and to acknowledge the tragedy of his died at a very young age in his mid-40s. But the president didn't do that, and I think that was unfortunate. There's kind of always room for compassion, empathy, grace. I think the attacks on the vice president's family were expected. They were not really. I'm not sure that they were really necessary in this debate, or that they were particularly instructive. But I think that the president's kind of not even a sentence or a moment of compassion for the vice president's loss was unfortunate.
Is there anything else that you'd really like to note that you think is important to be brought up, either highlights or lowlights, things you found particularly impactful about tonight's debate?
Well, I guess I would pick up on your last question about, when you're talking about presidential moments and just say that, this debate, since 1976, we've had presidential debates in every election cycle. And the first one was in 1960 with Kennedy Nixon. This was really the roughest that I can recall. It's probably a good thing that there was social distancing because I'm not sure if they would have shaken hands at the end of that. It was so personal and so visceral. The attacks, of course, the Clinton Trump debates were not pleasant in 2016 either. But I mean, these really kind of went for the jugular, and there are two more presidential debates to come. So we're entering a period of American politics that is really kind of a no holds bar kind of fighting approach, and that's not constructive for governance or policy making. So I think it's going to be a challenge as we look ahead to I don't think the vice presidential debate will be like that, frankly. But this presidential debate is going to be next two presidential debates. If this continues in that same kind of language and that tone and those attacks, it's going to be very difficult to find a route to conciliation after the election. I mean, we may enter a period of just stalemate until we can reach a better place where politicians are willing to work together, and that would be unfortunate if that's the case.
Well, Dr. Bose, thank you so much for joining us and recapping the debate.
Oh, thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Eli. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Us too. Our thanks again to the director of the Kalikow Center for the Study of the American Presidency here at Hofstra University, Dr. Meena Bose. And that will do it for this edition of WRHU's and Hofstra Votes Live's Road to the Polls.
Our election coverage continues next Tuesday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. with a look at how Latinx, Black, and LGBTQ voters will impact this election. And tune into Newsline from Monday to Friday for all the latest news in the lead up to November 3rd.
For WRHU, I'm Eli Finkelson.
And I'm Lauren Brill. Thank you for tuning in.